It's a great pleasure to welcome you at the Getty Center to this event dedicated this evening to art and culture in Cold War Hungary. Tonight's event, Looking into the Camera, is part of a film series developed in conjunction with the exhibition Promote, Tolerate, Ban, Art and Culture in Cold War Hungary, which has been co-curated by Christina Cuevas-Wolf and me. Together we have also co-edited the companion book here, and I want to thank you, Christina, a wonderful colleague and a friend. A real privilege to work with you. Please stand up. This exhibition is currently on view at the Wende Museum of the Cold War until August 26th in Culver City, so please go if you haven't been there yet. It's the result of a multi-year collaboration of the Wende Museum of the Cold War and the Getty Research Institute, and I would like to thank here also Francis Turpark from the Getty Research Institute and Hughes Segal from the Wende Museum for their ongoing support from the very beginning. The exhibition, Promote, Tolerate, Ban, presents how artists in Hungary experienced or responded to the unofficial cultural policy of János Kádár, which was colloquially known in Hungarian as the 3 T's for Promote, Tolerate, Ban, the 3 terms that in Hungarian start with the letter T. Artists could be supported by the socialist regime, they could be tolerated or outright banned, which in some cases meant exile. The exhibition and the book reveal how these categories were not clearly defined. There were gray areas, ambiguities, contradictions between the categories and in the way the cultural policy was applied and controlled. This evening, we are very fortunate to have here with us 2 artists from the art scene of this era. Peter Forgács, the media artist who made Picturesque Epochs and co-edited the Infermental 3 video art series. We have here several of his films in the GRI special collections that are available for you to see. And we also welcome today here artist János Vétó, whose excellent work is on exhibit at the Wende and is in the GRI special collections. I want to thank the Photographic Art Council of Los Angeles for supporting János' travel to Los Angeles and be with us this week, and for supporting his presentation yesterday at the Wende Museum. Thank you, Marjorie Ornston. Yesterday, János discussed his work, his artistic collaboration with artists such as Tibor Hoyos and others, and he showed us how artists like him were able to anticipate the idea of removing, as an artistic statement, the barbed wire that divided Austria and Hungary through the Iron Curtain. In 1985, as a performance art piece, he needed some barbed wire. He couldn't find it in a store, so he went to the border to get it and remove it. Thank you, János, and welcome. Where are you? Okay. Tonight's screenings expand on the exhibition themes of the 3 T's, showing different types of films made by artists in Cold War Hungary and through different generations. The first screening, Picturesque Epochs, is one of the latest films by Peter Forgács. It was released in 2016. I must clarify that we will be screening only a selection, less than half of the whole movie, only for sake of time, in order to be able to screen the examples of video artists from the 80s in the second part of the evening. Picturesque Epochs focuses on artist Maria Ganuzzi, who is presented through her own family movies. That is, movies that were originally created for personal use in a domestic space or also in a professional setting, but as personal memories. The setting in which Maria operated not only as an artist in her own terms, but also as the wife of an established painter, Josef Brezsny, who was born in 1916 and died in 2012, just to give you the parameters. But this is also a movie about 20th century Hungarian art. Across the different chapters, the history of art and public debates emerge through Maria's films, historical footage, and interviews woven together by Peter in his signature media art style, bringing to life found footage from a remote and privately guarded past for us to see today. Two people are interviewed by Peter during the film. Maria Ganozzi herself, who discusses her life through the films and the paintings, and Geza Pernetsky, one of the most important artists and art critics in Hungary today, whose work is discussed in the last essay in a companion book on his role of male art during the Cold War, and is on display in the exhibition at the Wende Museum in a section on archival memory. While in the course of the film, Pernetsky appears from time to time to provide an art historical frame on the artistic debates of the 20th century Hungarian art, in our selection tonight, we only see him at the beginning, in the invocation, where he is discussing the artistic and emotional impact he experiences when seeing the work by painter and graphic artist Katalin Verebic, who is a contemporary Hungarian artist born in 1980. Pernetsky's commentary at the beginning is very important as he addresses issues of artist creativity, the artist's impact in the world, their emotional impact not only in their immediate circles, but also beyond at a universal level. This invocation serves the purpose, if I may say, to frame the film about a female artist from an earlier generation. It sets the tone to understand the role of Maria Ganozzi. Maria, who was born in 1927, had 7 children with her husband, the painter Josef Presnay. Plus, she raised 2 from his previous marriage since his previous wife had died, so 9 children in total. Maria, the filmmaker, recorded her private and professional life, not only as a mother and a wife, but also as a painter cut in half. Now, Peter wants to make a comment here, and after that, we will be able to screen the movie. Thank you.
Good evening. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here again in the Getty, where I had the beautiful opportunity together with the Labyrinth project to create Danube Exodus. And a good part of the team is here of the Labyrinth project: Marcia Kinder, Scott Mahoy, and Rosemary Comella. Thank you for being here in this beautiful event. Briefly, I just want to add a little information about this cut that I provided, and I call it as the Getty cut, the Getty edition, having selected those parts that strengthen and underline and give the background for this beautiful exhibition and the Wende and this beautiful book that Christina and Isotta had put together. Why I have to say which and why have been saved in this 55 minutes, because I had to break up the original structure of a 130 minutes long epoch and epical work. So I use only 7 chapters: the invocation, the 1st, the 7th, the 12th, the 14th, 15th, and the 20th. So some dramaturgical narrative informations are missing from the logic of the larger scale, but we decided to create this, first of all, to save time for the Infermental 3, which is extremely important, and I'm happy that Isotta selected it because it's a beautiful pair to the Wende Museum exhibition, because it shows the Cold War Hungarian video art selection that is parallel to the graphic painting and photographic activity of the Hungarian underground and avant-garde artists. So this is briefly what I wanted to say, and thank you again, Isotta and the Getty and the Wende Museum, having me here.
I would like to introduce you now Arpad Kovacs, who is my colleague, assistant curator of photography at the Getty Museum, where there is a department of photographs. So we are colleagues and we work together on this project. His latest big project was the exhibition Breaking News, Turning the Lens on Mass Media. It was a very well-received exhibition on how artists reappropriated news photography. And this is an exhibition that happened in 2016-17. He's going to give an introduction on Infermental 3. Please join me in welcoming.
Good evening. International, Ferment, and Experimental. These are the words that were combined in 1980 to create the title Infermental, the first magazine on video cassette. Established by Hungarian filmmaker Gabor Bódy and organized to alternate editors from different countries, the project produced approximately 5 to 7 hours of footage annually between 1980 and 1991. The third edition of Infermental was organized in Hungary and edited by Peter Forgács and László Beka in 1983 and 1984. This edition included 99 contributors, 22 of whom were Hungarian, from 18 countries, and with a total runtime of about 6 hours. Each iteration was arranged into sections with succinct poetic titles that offered a glimpse into the broad ideas that threaded together these disparate videos. The third edition included 8 sections with titles ranging from ominous to playful, including New Claustrophobia, Hard and Software, and Eccentrics, among others. Gabor Bódy's wife and collaborator on the project, Verushka, has talked about some of the circumstances that facilitated the production of this undertaking in Hungary. One of the most important components was the Sony high-band studio that UNESCO set up at the National Institute for Educational Issues in Veszprém in the 1970s, which was intended for the production of audiovisual materials for Hungarian schools. After 5 years of operation, the studio was made available for commercial use, and it is here that Infermental 3 was compiled. The second most important component was the involvement and support provided by the famed Béla Balázs studio in Budapest, which financed and organized the publication. From the early 1960s through the 1980s, they were important supporters of production of experimental films by young filmmakers whose work ranged from documentaries to abstract works. The third issue of Infermental was of particular importance because it was the first time so many artists from the country were included in such an international undertaking, and in the company of better-known contributors like Tony Conrad, Joan Jonas, Lawrence Weiner, among others. While Infermental was referred to as a video magazine, it is in fact more of a compendium of clips taken from longer video recordings and film projects, and brought together by editors with a vision to celebrate some of the most interesting work being made in the format at the time. Beyond the bewildering heterogeneity of the individual works, Infermental's claim on the present is its underlying ethos, the dream of a different sphere of circulation, of international exchange and exhibition for artists working with video. The distribution of this video magazine predated the internet proper, and also largely the existence of film and video in the gallery. For that reason, its curatorial conceits seem as alien and as alluring as the surface patina of its analog technologies. Today, the Center for Art and Media at ZKM in Karlsruhe, Germany, houses the Infermental archive. With their help and permission, we have compiled a selection of video clips made by Hungarian artists that were included in Infermental 3. We are very fortunate to have Peter Forgács with us this evening, and after the screening, he will be in conversation with Isotta. Thank you.
Well, it's extremely difficult to see this Infermental, where we try to select from the many avant-gardist pieces the ones that the artists are still active in Hungary. So like János Vető, who's here, involved in 2 works, and we could see Gabor Bódy, who was, I think, easily could be said, a genius of film and experimental film. But there's something that I concluded now after 36 years, hearing my sons crying in the Spinoza Infinity in the background. The 36 years has passed, and what is the central idea now for me today of this Infermental, this avant-gardist series and combination? I think it's a great existential and artistic declaration of not recognizing the existing human conditions, the communism, and the oppression of thoughts, movement, freedom. So these artists have created a universe opposite to the existing oppressive culture, politics, and this is the common ground. And of course, we can find parallels in the French, the German, the Italian, North American avant-garde. But this is something a kind of very special for me, because here in the Getty now received a very special context. Is it funny, or I should cry about it? What should stand in museums? So I think I'm really grateful for the Getty and the Wende Museum to have it now, because this is something that could stand on its own right, parallel to the photographic, painting, performances, etc. So something that goes beyond only the aesthetical curiosity that comes out. And for me, these artists had built this parallel universe, which is not a bubble, but it has more right to exist than the communism which failed, and the oppressive society, which have a clear resonation, of course, today, which there is a wave back now today. So as Toynbee and Vico said, together with Aristotle and Plato, that things repeat themselves. So, but art not, and that is crucial.
Thank you, Peter. We thought that it was interesting to show these very different kind of films because they address different ways that artists became artists during the Cold War in a communist country and developed very different kind of work. So I wanted to tell us a little bit about how did an artist who wanted to become an artist would do that in terms of applying for the academy and then becoming an artist. I know in East Germany, for example, it was everybody could apply, but only a very limited number of people could be accepted to the academy, and that is because the system, the socialist system, would only be able to have a limited number of artists in order to sustain them to become state artists who do the commissions like we saw with Brezhnev today. He was doing the mural for the Komló minor city. How was that in Hungary?
It's a very interesting question because Brezsnai, the husband of Mária Ganóczy, the painter, the first film you saw tonight, is well accommodated in the East European, the Soviet zones artists who are serving, in a way, accommodating and loyal in artistic way to the rules of the game. And on the other hand, those who didn't want to play these tunes, of course, this was a minority, as always, it is, they refused to collaborate, not in a political sense only, but what are your rules? So it is a kind of Orwellian situation, how to be an artist in Hungary. And today, if somebody would like to write the history of the post-war Hungary, art history, then most of these people would stand also today who we saw their works and their faces in the Infermental collection or selection. But we hardly remember, at least in Hungary and East Europe, I can say, those who were the stars of these things. And it's right to say that it's the same with film. There are a lot of things that cannot stand on their right anymore, where they were fashionable and beautiful and acceptable. I'm not talking about Hollywood, but I'm talking about, okay, Stan Brakhage, Jonas Mekas, Hitchcock, the big avant-garde, you know, as Truffaut said it rightly. So what stands for itself today? So how to be an artist? Well, okay, you can accommodate and you can be the little poodle of Putin or North Korean dictator. And on the other hand, there is the big market. And somewhere in between, there is the rebel. There is the avant-garde in its old and very good sense. So, okay, I won't say today conformism, because that's really something that is beyond and under the ethical questions. But let's think of James Joyce or Charles Bukowski or, you know, or Andy Warhol. So we had our own existence in a parallel universe, and I think it has its deep existentialist consequences for me today. It's not being right or wrong, or doing good art or acceptable art or bad art, but you have one life, you know, and these people who I saw again after so many years on screen had this freedom of choice. And of course, it's not my duty or profession to evaluate what is good or what can stand for itself. So that's why I chose now this existentialism as understanding who are these individuals, what did they did, and of course it's like looking on different stars with the Hubble, you know. Wow.
Yes. Yeah, because in the case of Brezsnai, you could see how being part of the system meant that you enjoyed the security of the profession as an official artist, and you could travel to Paris, you could travel abroad, which was not a privilege that some of these artists did not have. We know János was not allowed to travel abroad, had many times problems. And so it was clear this compromise, and at the same time also the issue of surveillance that we saw in the first movie was an important aspect of the control of society and artists.
Yeah, well, when you asked me just a few minutes ago, how was it, why it was so difficult to be official artist in Hungary, I think it's the Orwellian control, the totalitarian control over life. So in Hungary, if somebody would like to have a car, they had to prepay the amount of the car. And then he would be on the list. So 5-10 years later, he would get the Kodak, the Trabant car, or the Moskvich car, or any East European produced car. And it was the same with the telephone. You couldn't get a telephone into your home because the surveillance was so strict that if the number of telephone lines would have been following the needs of the citizens, then the surveillance, listening to your talk, technically it was not so advanced as today it is, so it was manual, you know. So therefore they didn't develop phone lines. So it's the same with arts, you know. So we are just telephone machines, a closed circuit of the avant-garde, you know. We are talking and, okay, surveillance, who cares? They don't exist. So it is a paradox of art, and we never saw ourselves as martyrs, but we saw ourselves as free persons who could act under bad or interesting or difficult conditions. So art is not separated from the world, from the universe. And of course, there are fashions and there are tendencies, but what is good is good.
But you also had a way to navigate the system, to find the supplies, like you had all this fantastic equipment, a Bela Bala studio paid by the government, printing supplies, painting supplies, that were easy to find, right?
That was relatively easy, and it was different from country to country. In Romania, this was unacceptable and unimaginable. In Poland, it was possible. In East Germany, it was very difficult. So from country to country, the Soviet zone had its... Hungary was a kind of go-between place where, after the revolution of '56, the oppression changed its face, and they understood that they have to give some food, electricity, and fun, and Lake Balaton and sunshine, something, and tomato, and sausage, and circus, etc. Yeah, we have to finish. Yes. I won't call it censorship, I would call it clock. Clock.
Is there any question from
yes.
that you want to, anybody bring up? Maybe we have one or two questions.
Yes.
When you're talking about your film, when the artist was in Paris and the other artist was kind of keeping an eye on him, who was keeping an eye on the other artist?
Oh, well, you know, it's another fellow artist. Exactly. So he's another painter. He's a best friend, you know. So he was blackmailed or whatsoever, I know that concretely. So the spying on the other was a kind of integrated feature there. So somehow they bought people, they gave privilege to them, or they blackmailed them, and it was a totalitarian surveillance. And of course, today, when it's so easy to listen to anybody's phone, you know, they don't need this apparatus. But having these secret agencies' papers and documents coming out from the dungeon, from the archives, in a way, in Germany it's very free. Now we have to face the problems. Who was my friend? Who noted what did I do? Etc., etc. So it's not a moral question, it's a tragedy, you know. of existence. And of course, in their life, it was a drama, a family drama, because later this agent, Scholz's son, married the eldest daughter of Brezhnev. And she, for today, hates my film and tried to force her mother, 91-year-old mother, to get rid of me and this film and ban this film because it's about her father-in-law. And you know, in my family, it happened that it turned out that there were spies and agents also. And if I fought myself to get this information out from the dungeon, out from the archives, and everybody should have to have the right to know what they have on the records, then you have big surprises and you cannot censor yourself. And to conclude this dramatic phase of repression, I have to add that this genius filmmaker, Gabor Bódy, also worked for the agency. And his suicide, in my reading of his story and history, was deeply connected to his own frustration and personal drama. So I was so happy to see his face, and a year later he was dead. And this means that I still love him. He was my master. And not only he was my master, but he inspired dozens of artists and created in the Béla Balázs studio, which was a post-sensorial film studio, the sole independent film studio in the whole Soviet bloc. Because in the Béla Balázs studio, we could make these low-budget films, and the sensorial function of the cultural ministry or the film department of it had censored our films in the same three categories as the title of this exhibition in the Wende. So you saw Miklós Erdély there, his film was banned. János Vető's film were lost. Etc., etc. So, but after we could produce, so this survived. These things, of course, 80s were a little bit different than 70s, etc., etc. Now we go back to the 60s, in present time Hungary, okay? So it's a mixture of relative freedom and rebellious artists and oppressive or less oppressive regimes. But I think freedom is like a fire, is like a notion, is like a different aspect changing of creativity and creation. So I think this could be the conclusion.
Yes.
And thank you for, Jim, your question, because this points out this very sensitive and problematic parts. And we get really an in-depth view of double face of life and arts. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.